Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. More than 250 people were killed after Israel hit Lebanon with a massive wave of airstrikes after the US and Iran agreed to a ceasefire. Pakistan declares a two-day holiday in Islamabad ahead of high-stakes US-Iran talks. And NATO chief says Trump is disappointed with US allies not joining the Iran war. After a last-minute temporary ceasefire deal between the US and Iran, Israeli airstrikes have hit Lebanon, killing at least 254, with many injured. The ceasefire is at stake, as well as the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is threatening to close if Israel continues its strikes. This escalation could further dampen peace talks, which is scheduled to be held in Islamabad on Saturday.
Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 254 people and wounded 1,165 across Lebanon, marking the deadliest escalation since a US-Iran ceasefire was announced. The Israeli military said it carried out large-scale strikes on Wednesday, targeting more than 100 Hezbollah command centers and military sites across Beirut, the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon, describing it as its largest operation since the start of the US-Israel war on Iran. It said more than 100 locations were hit in less than 10 minutes as explosions lit up Beirut's southern suburbs, with densely populated areas among the hardest hit. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun condemned the strikes, accusing Israel of violating international law and humanitarian principles, and warning they undermine efforts toward regional stability. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said Lebanon welcomed the US-Iran ceasefire, but accused Israel of continuing its escalation, calling on the international community to intervene. The escalation has also deepened disputes over the scope of the truce. Iranian officials said the United States and Israel had reneged on the terms, arguing Lebanon should have been included, while Israel maintains the agreement does not apply.
But we thankfully at this...
US Vice President J.D. Vance said there had been a misunderstanding, noting Iran believed Lebanon was part of the deal. But Washington had not agreed to that.
I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful.
The disagreement has prompted broader international calls to expand the truce.
This is an important step forward. Of course, it is a fragile peace, but we want it to lead to an agreement. The Australian government also firmly believes that this has to apply to Lebanon as well. We want to see peace in this region, and it will make a difference, and I know that many Australians are concerned about the events that are occurring in Lebanon. This is a matter of not just the impact there, but the impact that it's having right around the world.
The United Nations described the wave of strikes as appalling. Oman's foreign ministry also condemned the attacks, calling them war crimes and a violation of international law, and urged global action to hold Israel accountable. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it was outraged by the scale of death and destruction, reporting that heavy explosive weapons struck crowded neighborhoods without effective warnings. It said civilians were rushing to hospitals and searching for missing relatives as conditions worsened. Hezbollah described the strikes as war crimes targeting civilians and said they would strengthen its resolve to continue fighting.
US President Donald Trump said Wednesday all American ships, aircraft and military personnel will remain in and around Iran until the country fully complies with the agreed deal. He warned that if Iran fails to comply, US forces would respond with overwhelming force. The agreement, he added, keeps the Strait of Hormuz open and bans nuclear weapons, while the military remains ready for any contingency. Diplomatic efforts are intensifying ahead of US-Iran talks in Islamabad this Saturday. The UN Secretary-General has warned that ongoing Israeli attacks on Lebanon poses a grave risk to the fragile US-Iran truce.
US and Iranian delegations are set to meet in Islamabad for ceasefire talks as Washington pushes to turn a temporary truce into a broader agreement. The US negotiating team, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, is being dispatched by Donald Trump following mediation efforts by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Uncertainty also surrounds the Strait of Hormuz. While some ship movement has resumed, restrictions remain in place, and vessels may still require approval from Iranian authorities to pass. Speaking in Hungary, Vance described the ceasefire as fragile, saying progress depends on both sides negotiating in good faith. He warned the United States is prepared to resume military action if diplomacy fails. Analysts also warn that even if the ceasefire holds, the economic impact of the conflict could be severe.
If the war really ends now, if the ceasefire sticks and we're able to see a beginning of reconstruction of the damage that's been done in the region, I think we might end up looking at a total economic cost of about, let's say, 20% of the global pandemic. So very significant, but something that we'll be able to live through in a year's time, for example.
Despite the 2-week ceasefire agreement, the situation on the ground remains unstable, with continued violence reported in parts of the region. Iran claims that 3 key clauses of a proposed 10-point framework had already been violated ahead of the talks, including continued fighting in Lebanon, an alleged drone incursion into Iranian airspace, and disputes over uranium enrichment. Meanwhile, the White House says Iran has abandoned its unacceptable plan and submitted a more workable proposal, while President Trump maintains firm demands, including ending uranium enrichment.
President Trump and the team determined the new modified plan was a workable basis on which to negotiate and to align it with our own 15-point proposal. The president's red lines, namely the end of Iranian enrichment in Iran, have not changed. And the idea that President Trump would ever accept an Iranian wish list as a deal is completely absurd. The president will only make a deal that serves in the best interests of the United States of America, and he as a negotiating team will focus on this effort over the next 2 weeks, so long as the Strait of Hormuz remains open with no limitations or delays.
With both sides maintaining firm positions, the outcome of the talks remains uncertain.
Ahead of high-stakes peace talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad this weekend, Pakistan has ramped up security across its capital city. Authorities have declared Thursday and Friday a public holiday in Islamabad. Hira Mustafa reports.
Islamabad is on high alert ahead of critical peace talks between the United States and Iran. Delegations from both countries are expected in the capital on Friday. The U.S. team will be led by Vice President J.D. Vance, while Iran's delegation is headed by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf. Formal negotiations are scheduled to begin on Saturday, with Pakistan acting as the mediator between the warring parties. Officials say all eyes are on Islamabad, which is why security has been tightened across the city's red zone, home to government offices and foreign missions. The military is coordinating operations, supported by police teams and paramilitary rangers, in what authorities describe as an unprecedented security effort to avoid any untoward situation. A prominent hotel in the red zone has been vacated and reserved exclusively for the visiting delegations. Meanwhile, a U.S. security team is already on the ground, reviewing arrangements, and high security protocols are reportedly in place for the Iranian delegation. Due to security concerns, officials have not disclosed the protocol's details. Authorities have advised residents to avoid travelling to central Islamabad over the next 2 days, as markets and businesses will remain closed on April 9th and 10th. Zones close to the administrative centre of Islamabad are also seeing access restrictions. Officials say that with strong diplomatic ties to both the US and Iran, Pakistan's mediation has placed Islamabad in the global spotlight. Supported by regional powers including Turkey, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, experts say the Pakistani government now faces a tough challenge of turning a temporary ceasefire into lasting peace. Analysts say everything hinges on these talks, which could shape Middle East stability and US-Iran relations in the years to come. Hira Mustafa for A News, Islamabad.
One of Islam's holiest sites, Al-Aqsa Mosque, has reopened in Jerusalem after weeks of restrictions linked to the regional conflict. Worshippers returned early in the morning as access was restored.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem reopened on Thursday after a 40-day closure imposed by Israeli authorities over war-related security measures. Hundreds of Muslim worshippers gathered at dawn for morning prayers, marking their return to the site after weeks of restricted access.
I thank God for opening it for us, and I was prostrating for God in gratitude for opening it, hoping that it will stay open and will not close.
Later in the day, a group of Jewish visitors was allowed into the compound under existing arrangements. Their presence is often seen as sensitive under a long-standing status quo in which the site is administered by a Jordanian Islamic authority, and non-Muslims may visit but not pray there.
Our message is to set out for Al-Aqsa Mosque at all times so that it remains full of worshippers and prayers. May God bless all those who set out for prayers. May God bless them.
The mosque had been shut since February 28th, following Israeli security measures linked to regional tensions, including strikes involving Iran. The closure drew criticism from Muslim communities who view the site as a central place of worship.
Tensions are rising between the United States and NATO after President Donald Trump criticised the alliance's limited role during the Iran conflict and signalled possible consequences for some member states. Our US correspondent sent us this report.
The Trump administration has blasted the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for not supporting the U.S. during Operation Epic Fury, a military campaign against Iran's missile and nuclear development program that has largely seen NATO on the sidelines. New reports suggest that the Trump administration is considering to punish some NATO members deemed unhelpful during the Iran war, including potentially relocating U.S. military bases from Europe. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt on Wednesday said that President Trump believes that NATO was tested and they failed during the Iran war. That's according to the White House. The increased tensions with NATO come as President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met at the White House. Rutte is known for having a warm relationship with Trump, but the president has been increasingly publicly critical of NATO. In recent weeks, Trump has called NATO a, quote, paper tiger that is unhelpful in times of need. Asked by a reporter earlier this month about withdrawing from the alliance, Trump said, "Wouldn't you if you were me?" Trump's conversation with Rutte was described by officials as being, quote, very frank and candid. Trump has called for countries that depend on oil from the Arabian Gulf region to break Iran's chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. But European countries are unlikely to join mine clearing or other such missions to free up navigations as long as hostilities continue, according to diplomats. During their private meeting, Rutte expressed a shared interest in restoring normal maritime trade after the conflict caused energy prices to spike globally. The NATO Secretary General is believed to have also highlighted steps that European member states are taking in increasing their defense spending. That's something that Trump has repeatedly been pushing for NATO allies to do more when it comes to burden sharing. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is reportedly considering pulling U.S. troops from NATO allies that refused to support the Iran military campaign and redeploying them to countries that backed U.S. military efforts. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived in Abu Dhabi on Thursday for the second stage of his Gulf tour. Starmer was greeted by Executive Affairs Authority Chairman Khaldoon Khalifa Al Mubarak on arrival. He is meeting regional leaders to discuss maintaining the fragile US-Iran ceasefire and restoring confidence in shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. The visit follows talks in Jeddah and was planned before the ceasefire was announced. US lawmakers are renewing efforts to limit President Donald Trump's military actions against Iran as political divisions deepen in Washington. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says a vote next week will seek approval for any further strikes. The push follows a 2-week ceasefire announced by Trump hours after warning Tehran over the Strait of Hormuz. Schumer called the approach unhinged, saying it has failed to curb Iran's nuclear program and driven up fuel prices. The White House says Trump acted within his authority while Republicans back his policy.
Jay Good and Alex Preddy, Senate Democrats were clear.
A historic journey to the far side of the moon is coming to an end, with 4 astronauts on board the Artemis II now heading home after pushing the boundaries of human spaceflight.
To my esteemed
4 astronauts on board the Artemis II mission are now on their way back to Earth after a historic journey around the far side of the moon, marking the first mission of its kind in 50 years. The crew, NASA astronauts Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover and Christina Koch, alongside Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, launched from Florida last week. Just a few days later, they reached the moon, flying past its shadowed far side and becoming the most distant humans ever to travel in space. There have also been lighter moments along the way, including a call with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who spoke with the crew about their experiences and what they've learned, and said Canadians are very proud.
As I say, Canadians are so proud of what you're doing and the collaboration, and I just want to have a chance, if I may. I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking with you, Jeremy, and the crew. We've all been watching and inspired by what you're doing. And
U.S. Prime Minister, I did want to.
During the call, Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen held up a national flag bearing the Prime Minister's title to the cameras.
So I wrote your name on the back. Well, your title on the back.
Earlier in the week, during a 6-hour flyby, the astronauts broke a record set by the Apollo 13 mission, reaching around 252,000 miles from Earth, about 4,000 miles farther than any crew before. On flight day 7, as they began heading home, the crew linked up with astronauts aboard the International Space Station, describing their unique view of the moon while capturing remarkable images during the lunar flyby.
By phone from the USS John
NASA says the Orion spacecraft remains in good condition, with all systems running smoothly as the crew makes their return journey. Back on Earth, scientists have been closely monitoring every stage, analyzing both live and recorded communication to better understand the moon and the wider solar system. The mission is part of NASA's wider Artemis program, a multi-billion-dollar effort designed to return humans to the moon by 2028 before China, and to build a lasting American presence there over the next decade. The astronauts are expected to return on Friday evening, splashing down off the coast of California after nearly 10 days in space. Their return will mark the end of a landmark mission, and another major step towards sending humans deeper into space.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we will examine the implications of the proposed 2-week ceasefire in the Iran war as Israel signals support for the agreement while simultaneously carrying out large-scale strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Israel's expressed support for a proposed 2-week ceasefire linked to the ongoing Iran war, but has made clear that Lebanon isn't included in the agreement as tensions continue to expand across the wider region. Shortly after the ceasefire announcement, the Israeli Defense Forces launched one of their largest coordinated strikes against Hezbollah, targeting more than 100 sites within minutes across southern Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley and Beirut. Israeli officials argue Hezbollah remains a separate security threat, while analysts warn that continued strikes risk widening the conflict despite diplomatic efforts to stabilise the situation. Joining me now to discuss is Tom Gross, political analyst from Tel Aviv. Tom, welcome to the program.
Hello.
Now, Israel has supported the 2-week ceasefire, but has clearly stated that Lebanon is not included. How sustainable can this ceasefire be when it doesn't cover all active fronts?
Well, it should be an entirely separate issue. I mean, Lebanon does not share a border with Iran. Hezbollah in Lebanon have been attacking Israel on and off since the group was founded 2 or 3 decades ago. It is a foreign implant in Lebanon. And as Vice President J.D. Vance said, why does Iran think Lebanon should be included, or Hezbollah should be included in the ceasefire? It should not concern Iran. So it is whether or not there should be a ceasefire in Lebanon is a separate issue. Maybe they should, but it wasn't party, as the Americans and Israelis said, to the ceasefire between the United States and Iran.
So the idea of carried out strikes on more than 100 Hezbollah targets shortly after the ceasefire announcement, do you think this indicates Israel seeking to shape the battlefield before the full truce, if there's going to be a full truce, takes full effect?
Well, it's more simple than that. Israel, or the government of Israel, has promised the citizens of Israel in the north of the country, and to remind you, Israel's a very small country, so it's promised the population in the north, which is maybe 20 or 25% of the country, that they can return to their homes and they won't have to live under constant rocket fire at civilian targets in Israel from Lebanon, from Hezbollah. So it is an aim of the government of Israel, as it will be the aim of any government, to protect its citizens. So quite apart from anything that's happening in Iran, Israel is determined once and for all to have peace on its border with Lebanon. And the basic offer, Israel says, is when Israeli civilians can live in peace in northern Israel, so the south of Lebanon could also should also live in peace. But we have to understand that this is not a conflict between Israel and Lebanon, it's a conflict with Hezbollah, which are a radical Shia militant organization, Hezbollah, party of Allah, of God, and they don't only hold Israel hostage, they hold Lebanon hostage, because Lebanon cannot function as a state when you have this radical movement, which is in a way more powerful than the Lebanese army, that is very, very well funded by, in the past, the government of Iran, but also by its illicit drugs trade. It's got a massive drugs trade in Africa and Latin America and so on. And it is in the interest of everyone that Hezbollah is disarmed, as it should have been many years ago, according to UN resolutions. And I think it's very, very unhelpful for governments in Europe, like the government of France, to in effect be supporting Hezbollah and trying to save Hezbollah. If anybody wants a better future in Lebanon, as well as Israel and other countries, Hezbollah should not anymore play a disruptive role in launching rockets and killing people. And just to remind people, Hezbollah hasn't only killed Israelis, they've killed a lot of people in Syria. They were closely aligned with the Assad government. And they've also killed a lot of people in Lebanon. They had that big port explosion a couple of years ago, in which I think thousands were killed and injured by Hezbollah, chemical weapons and other materials stored in the ports that went off. And they've also been responsible in the past for murdering Hariri, the Prime Minister of Lebanon. Hezbollah are not a group that anybody should be trying to keep in place and saving it with yet another ceasefire.
Okay, so I know you're very clear on that the Hezbollah fighting with Israel should be kept separate to the Iran conflict that's going on, but does excluding Lebanon from the ceasefire risk undermining confidence in the broader diplomatic process? So could continued strikes against Hezbollah complicate these mediation efforts that are currently underway? But we know Pakistan's Prime Minister had previously said that the agreed ceasefire covered everywhere, including Lebanon.
Yes, I think Pakistan's Prime Minister was mistaken when he said that. That's certainly what the United States says, and also Israel. Will it complicate matters? Perhaps. But there are already so many complications and hard matters. Look, if one of the demands of the United States, and indeed of Sunni Arab countries too, is that Iran stops weaponizing and supporting and arming all these proxies in the Middle East, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, various militia in Iraq, previously in Syria, and so on. This is one of the demands of the ceasefire, that Iran stops, militarizing groups in a whole number of other countries. If Hezbollah were willing to announce that they will disarm, become a regular political party in Lebanon, then there will be no conflict in Lebanon or with Lebanon. So it could complicate matters, but so will all the American demands complicate matters. It's also a demand of America in the international community that they give up their enriched uranium in Iran, that they open the Straits of Hormuz, they stop interfering in a whole bunch of other countries I just mentioned, like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and Israel and Gaza. So, all these things can complicate the ceasefire, but the ceasefire isn't going to last unless the Iranians show flexibility on all of these issues.
Okay. All right, let's move on now to President Trump's messaging on social media. He shifted in tone in the final hours before the ceasefire announcement. Does this suggest the complexity of negotiations behind the scene, or what does it suggest about the complexity of negotiations behind the scene?
Well, I think first and foremost, it shows the complexity of President Trump's mind and President Trump's negotiating skills. Sometimes he contradicts himself, not just between one tweet and another. He contradicts himself within a single paragraph or even within a single sentence. He'll say on one hand that there's been regime change in Iran and got a much more reasonable and pragmatic and moderate regime now in Iran, which is not the case, of course. And then he'll also say in the same paragraph that the regime is horrible and we're going to teach them a lesson and set back civilization and so on. So it's very hard to know what to make of it. I would say that Trump is employing what's known as the madman theory, whereby he deliberately is trying to muddy the waters and confuse his opponents as a negotiating ploy. And I think we have to look more carefully at what Trump actually does, rather than every sentence in his tweets, which we should not take literally because he says all kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay. Tom, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Thank you for your analysis today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. China's foreign ministry said on Wednesday that Afghanistan and Pakistan agreed during peace talks in Urumqi to explore a comprehensive solution to the conflict that broke out between the two countries last October. Our correspondent from Beijing has more.
China announced that Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to avoid further escalation after months of border clashes, military attacks and retaliatory measures strained relations, as Beijing stepped up diplomatic efforts to defuse rising tensions between the two countries. The tensions have been driven largely by Pakistan's accusations that Afghanistan's Taliban-led authorities are harboring or failing to act against militant operations along the frontier, allegations that Kabul strongly denies. The fallout has included cross-border exchanges of fire, airstrikes, border closures, and mass deportations of Afghan nationals from Pakistan, pushing ties to one of their lowest points in recent years. Against this backdrop, China hosted trilateral talks in Urumqi aimed at de-escalating the situation and restoring dialogue, bringing together delegations from Pakistan's foreign ministry and Afghanistan's Taliban-led administration, while positioning itself as a mediator with stakes in regional security and economic connectivity.
Both sides expressed deep appreciation and gratitude for China's mediation efforts and thoughtful arrangements as host, describing China as fair, impartial and dedicated. Afghanistan and Pakistan reaffirmed their commitment to resolving differences as soon as possible and improving bilateral relations in accordance with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence.
The talks, held in Xinjiang's capital and concluded yesterday, mark a renewed attempt to stabilize relations, with both sides agreeing to avoid further escalation. China said it will continue to maintain communication and facilitate dialogue to support improved Afghanistan-Pakistan ties and overall regional stability. Manu Nathun, A News, Beijing.
Iran's ambassador in Pakistan, Reza Amiri Moqaddam, removed his statement after stating that a delegation will arrive in Islamabad later on Thursday to prepare the ceasefire negotiations with the US side, which he said will focus on Tehran's 10-point proposal. Our correspondent brings us the latest details from Tehran.
Reporting from downtown Tehran, the ralliers are chanting slogans against ceasefire and talks with the United States. In the latest development, Tehran's envoy to Islamabad, Reza Amiri Moqaddam, withdrew his announcement after stating that the Iranian delegation will arrive in Pakistan's federal capital on Thursday to sort out technical aspects of truce talks with the US, reportedly scheduled on Saturday. According to local media, he has said in a post on social platform X that the upcoming talks will be held despite the skepticism of Iranian side due to repeated violations of the ceasefire by Tel Aviv to sabotage the diplomatic initiative of Pakistan to mediate between Tehran and Washington. The Iranian diplomat was referring to Israel's large-scale bombings of Lebanon, intrusion of a military drone, and US denial of Tehran's right of nuclear enrichment on the first day of the 2-week truce on Wednesday. So far, it is not confirmed who will be Iran's chief negotiator in Islamabad, but unofficial reports suggested that Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf will lead the Iranian team if Vice President J.D. Vance is going to head the U.S. negotiators. It is the second day of the 2-week truce following a 39-day Israeli-US war on Iran, and Tehran has condemned ceasefire breaches during President Masoud Pezeshkian's phone conversations with his Azerbaijani, French, Japanese, and Pakistani counterparts. Also, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held phone contacts on the aftermath of the ceasefire violations with his Azerbaijani, Cypriot, Finnish, Iraqi, Saudi, and Turkish counterparts, as well as Pakistani Army Chief Asim Munir. General Munir was reportedly in communication with the US President Donald Trump to mediate a truce in the Israeli-US war on Iran, which broke on 28th of February. amid rising disputes between Iran and the U.S. over provisions of the ceasefire framework stipulated in their conflicting draft proposals. Speaker Ghalibaf has said that it was unreasonable to hold talks with U.S. after violations of the truce by Israel and U.S. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from downtown Tehran for A News.
Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov held a phone call on Wednesday with his Ukrainian counterpart Andriy Sybiha. The ministers discussed bilateral cooperation in politics, the economy, energy, transport and humanitarian issues. They also exchanged views on regional issues of mutual interest, exploring ways to strengthen ties between the two countries. Azerbaijan's Human Rights Commissioner has hosted their Slovak counterpart in Baku as the two sides took to deepen cooperation and exchange experiences on rights protection mechanisms. Ombudsman Sabina Alieva met Slovak Ombudsman Robert Dobroyotsky, highlighting cooperation including in human rights. She outlined reforms, the Ombudsman's mandate and monitoring of detention facilities under the National Preventive Mechanism. Dobroyotsky said Azerbaijan's experience could be applied in Slovakia. The visit also includes meetings with state bodies and a tour of the Citizens Reception Centre. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has spoken with his US counterpart about the fragile ceasefire with Iran as Ankara urges restraint and pushes for a lasting settlement. The call comes amid cautious optimism following the announcement of the truce. Here's more.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held a phone call late Wednesday with US President Donald Trump to discuss the fragile ceasefire with Iran. In the phone call, Erdogan warned against any actions that might undermine the truce, according to Turkey's communications directorate. Erdogan also told Trump that the ceasefire, which was brokered by Pakistan, represented an important opportunity to reach a permanent peace agreement. Earlier the same day, Erdogan had welcomed the ceasefire, saying it should be fully implemented on the ground without leaving room for what he called provocations or sabotage. The ceasefire, announced earlier this week amid escalating hostilities in the region, has significantly reduced cross-border strikes, although tensions remain high. However, disagreements have emerged over the scope of the truce, especially as to whether it applies to Lebanon. Israeli officials have said that hostilities involving Hezbollah in Lebanon are not covered by the ceasefire, while Iran and others say the agreement should include all fronts linked to the conflict. The uncertainty has raised concerns that continued exchanges of fire along the Lebanese front could undermine the broader ceasefire. Turkey, for its part, has called for restraint across all theaters, warning that any escalation could jeopardize diplomatic efforts. In a related development, humanitarian assistance from Turkey has begun reaching Iran. 3 Turkish trucks laden with medical supplies crossed into western Iran on Wednesday through the Gurbulak border gate in Turkey's eastern Ağrı province. According to state media, the aid convoy was organized by the local health directorate in the Turkish city of Van. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
At least 2 people have died after floodwaters swept away their car in Osmaniye province in southern Turkey. Heavy rainfall caused a stream in the district of Kadirli to overflow, flooding roads and carrying away several vehicles. Homes and businesses were also damaged. In nearby Düzici, a bridge collapsed after a river burst its banks, cutting off a local road. Emergency teams have been deployed across the area with evacuations and cleanup efforts continuing. Afghanistan's disaster management authorities say a new wave of natural disasters has deepened the humanitarian crisis across the country, with more deaths, injuries and widespread damage reported in just the last 24 hours. Officials warn the toll could rise further as more rain and flooding are forecast in the days ahead. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Afghanistan's National Disaster Management Authority says at least 15 people have been killed and 18 others injured in the past 24 hours alone as flash floods, heavy rainfall and related disasters continue to batter several provinces. The agency says the damage to homes has also been severe, with 139 houses completely destroyed and a further 657 partially damaged. According to ANDMA, these latest casualties bring the overall toll from the past 2 weeks to 148 dead, 216 injured and 8 people still missing. Officials say the wave of disasters began around March 26th and has since affected 28 provinces across Afghanistan, from north to south and east to west. The impact has been especially harsh in rural communities where families have lost homes, farmland and livelihoods. Residents in flood-hit areas are also facing mounting financial losses, adding to the strain on already vulnerable communities. The disaster has also disrupted transport and relief efforts. Afghan officials say several major roads, including the Kabul-Jalalabad Highway, the Salang Pass and the Kabul-Herat Highway, were closed because of flooding, landslides and heavy snowfall. The closures are hampering travel and making it harder for aid to reach affected areas. ANDMA is warning that more rainfall and flash floodings are expected in the coming days, fueling fear that humanitarian situation could get even worse. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev met Prime Minister of Lithuania Inga Ruginen in Baku to discuss strengthening bilateral ties. Both sides focused on expanding cooperation in energy, trade and investment, while also calling for more high-level visits. The Lithuanian Prime Minister welcomed recent peace developments between Azerbaijan and Armenia and praised reconstruction efforts in areas affected by past conflict. Aliyev said Azerbaijan is pushing for regional peace and reopening trade links despite ongoing challenges such as landmines. Let's take a short break now. When we return, we'll look at strengthening diplomatic ties between Azerbaijan and European partners as Lithuania's Prime Minister is on her visit to Baku. Stay with us.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A News, and let's bring in our guest now. Alexandra Filipenko, political analyst, joins us from Vilnius, Lithuania. Alexandra, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Lithuania's Prime Minister is visiting Azerbaijan following a series of regional diplomatic engagements. What does this suggest about growing political dialogue between Azerbaijan and European partners?
Well, I must say that positively assess current relations, and they agree for a stronger cooperation and further expansion. And this is a big interest for Lithuania currently, and in general for European partners also. The main focus right now is to increase trade turnover and actually promote mutual investments. Of course, the financial part plays the biggest role as of now, and we understand that for Lithuania, this is also, and in general for Europe, this is a way to, let's say, lessen any kind of pressure that European Union can have from the United States. Right now, with President Trump basically stating that the United States are more interested in the Western Hemisphere, For Europe, it's very important to turn to the other side. And first of all, of course, to Azerbaijan, potentially Azerbaijan. And also, I cannot avoid mentioning President Trump, Azerbaijan right now being strengthening its ties with the United States. And we are seeing the interest of President Trump, although he might sometimes pronounce the name of the country in some interesting fashion, but the interest is there. And we know that no matter what President Trump, how President Trump can make mistakes, anyone makes mistakes, but we understand that the financial interest is there, the investment interest is there. And Lithuania right now wants to strengthen its role, its international role, and also to strengthen the intergovernmental commissions as some key, let's say, coordination mechanisms. Of course, the emphasis is on the cooperation along the middle corridor and that Europe-Asia route that is actually very interesting via South Caucasus.
So, Alexandra, Azerbaijan has increasingly positioned itself as a bridge between Europe and Central Asia. How important is this role for EU member states such as Lithuania?
Very important. Again, coming back to the role Azerbaijan plays in the international relations right now, we are seeing growing tensions in the region in general, and Lithuania, like no other country, or like no other country, let's say in Western Europe, understands how important it is not to allow Russia to influence the relations between Azerbaijan and European countries. And of course, Russia wants to play a big role as it used to be in the past. So this emphasis on cooperation, this interest in broader international cooperation and transport and logistics, also energy cooperation, security cooperation, that's very, very important, cooperation on resilience, on hybrid threats. This is of great interest for Lithuania and for the European Union in general, especially because of the possible influence from the Russian side. And of course, we understand the Kremlin right now is mainly focused on the war with Ukraine. Nevertheless, the Kremlin is following closely what is happening in the region. And for Lithuania, very well understands how great it would be not to have Russia meddle in those relations between the European Union and Azerbaijan.
Now, Lithuania has traditionally supported closer EU engagement in the eastern neighbourhood. How might Vilnius view Azerbaijan's evolving regional role, and might smaller EU member states play a more active role in shaping EU-Azerbaijan relations?
We are seeing right now that smaller European Union nations are playing a very big role also in NATO, for example, because what we're hearing from Washington is that President Trump is even thinking of relocating some of the US military bases from Western European countries to Lithuania and to countries like Lithuania, because Lithuania has been investing in its own security more than many other Western European countries. So right now we are already seeing that the smaller European countries are playing a bigger role in even such big unions like NATO alliance or European Union. And of course, for Lithuania, again, coming back to possible Russian influence and Vilnius understanding that possible Russian influence in Baku also, this is very important to have those smaller European nations that are very powerful in projecting that idea of closer cooperation with Azerbaijan, closer cooperation with Baku, especially because Azerbaijan right now is a power player not only in the region, but internationally, coming back to President Donald Trump and his special relations also with Azerbaijan.
And how might collaboration between Azerbaijan, Georgia and Central Asian countries influence broader connectivity initiatives?
Well, of course, first of all, we should be talking about that international coordination, cooperation with the different international organizations. In general, the cooperation with transport, cooperation regarding logistics, it's all very, very important, especially also coming back to those scales between Russia and the United States, with the European countries feeling that the United States are more interested in the Western Hemisphere, and European nations need to play a bigger role together in cooperation with South Caucasus countries, in cooperation with Azerbaijan, with Georgia, in cooperation with different countries of the region. So they need to have that strengthened role in order, first of all, to be secure, the security dimensions, this resilience with hybrid threats, first of all, this potential resilience to any other actual threats, let's put it this way, especially regarding a war in Ukraine and everything that's happening in general, and also strengthening the economies, the increased trade turnover. This is one of the biggest interests, mutual investments. This is a very big interest. So this intergovernmental role of different countries and let's say smaller unions of different sorts, for example, Lithuania with Azerbaijan, with some other countries, a few European countries with Azerbaijan and some other countries. Those unions, those smaller unions of different countries are very important, especially because we are seeing lesser and might be seeing lesser and lesser role of the United States in this hemisphere and potential Moscow's influence on each and every of the countries.
Okay. And Alexandra, Europe continues to look for reliable partners in energy and transport corridors, as you said earlier. Does Azerbaijan's strategic geography increase its relevance in this context?
Absolutely, of course. And we understand that the interest is, first of all, again, talking about energy security, talking about all of those issues, we cannot avoid thinking of Russia, of course, and Baltic states were one of the first ones who tried to get rid of the connectivity with Russia regarding security, regarding energy, and trying to find new ways for energy and for their securing its energy sector. And of course, Azerbaijan is playing a very big part there, a very big role there. The energy security is the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about any kind of sanctions relief. That's what we saw after the start of Epic Fury, of the U.S. operation in Iran, the sanctions relief for Russia because of energy prices going up. And that is why especially the relations with Azerbaijan are playing such a big role for countries like Lithuania and for the European Union in general, because of that energy security that can be provided not solely but mainly by Azerbaijan.
Okay, and my last question to you, Alexandra, let's look at another what appears to be a pivotal point. People-to-people ties were highlighted as part of the visit's objectives. How important are cultural and academic exchanges in strengthening long-term partnerships?
It's important. We cannot say enough about the importance of people-to-people communications and cultural exchanges, especially because countries like Lithuania really need a new connectivity, let's say, throughout coming out of the European Union, not only in the European Union, but in general all over the world. This is a very important point for the current government, and they're trying to find new ties and new opportunities for scientific connectivity. And there are not fear, but let's say some thoughts of how secure it is to have scientific exchanges with countries like China. But of course, when we're talking about countries like Azerbaijan, countries like Georgia, countries of the region, there is no reserve. There is no, let's say, a thoughts of whether it's secure or not. It is secure. And that is why those connections, those cultural connections, scientific connections, academic connections are playing a big role, especially because Lithuania right now is placing a big emphasis on new scientific and academic connections all over the world, not only in the European Union.
Okay, Alexandra, it's always a pleasure having you on A News. Thank you for joining us and your analysis today.
Thank you very much.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.